the Industrial Revolution a period of monumental change in history. It transferred economics, societies, and even a very fabric on human labor. But what did it cost? Let's take you back to the 19th century to uncover the realities of life that happened during this era.
As we dive into this era, we will explore how workers' rights evolved, the labors and events that shaped modern labor laws, and shifting the responsibilities of workers and the government.
We'll also explore the societal impact of the Industrial Revolution, discussing how it influenced ideas of fairness, social justice, and progress.
The rise of factories brought unequal levels of production, but for the workers, it was a different story. Factories were dark, cramped, and dangerous. The Sadler Report of 1832 sheds light on these conditions.
One testimony from the Sadler Report reveals the grueling schedules imposed on workers. A child laborer recounted. Questions. Sadler: during those long hours of labor, could you be punctual? How did you awake? Michael: I seldom did awake spontaneously. I was most generally awoke or lifted out of bed, sometimes asleep, by my parents. Sadler: were you always in time? Michael: no. Sadler: what was the consequence if you had been too late? Michael: I was most commonly beaten. Sadler: severely? Michael: was severely, I thought. Sadler: in those mills is testament towards the latter part of the day going on perpetual? Michael: perpetually. Sadler: so that you can hardly be in the mill without hearing constant crying? Michael: never an hour, I believe. Sadler: do you think that if the overlookers were natural, a human person, it would still be found necessary for him to beat the children in order to keep up their attention and vigilance at the termination of the extraordinary days of labor? Michael: yes, the machines churn off regularly, quantity of cardings, and of course, they must keep as regular as their work. The whole of the day, they must keep with the machine, and therefore, however humane the slobber may be, as he must keep up with the machines. The fault with he spurs the children to keep up, also by various means, but that which he commonly resorts to is to strap them down when they become drowsy. Sadler: at that time, when you were beaten for not keeping up with your work, were you anxious to have done it if you possibly could? Michael: yes, the dread of being beaten if we could not keep up with our work was a sufficient impulse to keep us up to it if we could. Sadler: when you got home at night after this labor, did you feel fatigued? Michael: very much so. Sadler: had you any time to be with your parents and to receive instructions from them? Michael: no. Sadler: what did you do? Michael: all that we did when we got home was to get a little bit of supper that was provided for us and go straight to bed. If supper had not been made ready directly, we should have gone to sleep while it was preparing, which took a toll in the morning after. Sadler: did you not as a child feel it was very grievous hardship to be roused so soon in the morning? Michael: I did. Sadler: were the rest of the children similar circumstanced? Michael: yes, all of them, but they were not all of them so far from their work as I was. Sadler: and if you had been too late, you were under the impression of being cruelly beaten? Michael: I generally was beaten when I happened to be too late, and when I got up into the oppression of the morning of that was so great that I used to run and cry all the time as I went to the mill. Matthew Cabaret, now 22, and a blanket manufacturer by the time of the Sadler Report, had been a factory child between the ages of 8 and 12. He had worked from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. with an hour for meal at noon. There was no breakfast break. When trade was brisk, work had started an hour earlier and finished an hour later. He had lived about 2 miles from the mill. These schedules not only left workers physically and mentally exhausted and battered and beaten.
Another trouble account from a worker that described injuries that were commonplace. Question was, did you not send another child to the factory after the extra hours had begun? The answer they replied with was yes. Question is, did you not think that the injuries would be serious to his health? The answer they replied was, I did not perceive any injuries that had taken place at the time. And besides, the relief children were still kept on at the time to assist the weaker children. The extra hours performed at the time by the extra hands at their leisure, and the weaker children left employment at the usual time. The question we asked, did the strong children at the time work extra hours and usual hours too? They replied with yes. And did it hurt them? No. Question is there any way or any form that the mills were conducted and making it worse at the present time than it was then? They replied that the extra set of children has been, for some years, done differently entirely.
The physical environment of factories was equally harsh. Workers reported breathing in toxic fumes, getting extremely hot or cold. One factory worker said the conditions were unbearable. The air was thick and shooting chemicals, stinging our eyes and choking our lungs. In summers, the heat was suffocating, with machines radiating an unbearable warmth, while in winter, the cold seeped through the walls, numbing our fingers and toes to the point where you won't even feel injuries or perceive them until you left. There was no escape from the noise. The deafening clatter of machines filled the air, drowning out every thought.
And I think I need to put into emphasis again that these are young men and women getting beamed. I have another interview, and I will be referring to the interview as WC. Sadler, to keep you at your work at such a length of time, especially towards the termination of such labor's day, what word means to taking you to keep you awake? WC, they strapped us and beat us at times when we were not quite ready to do think the frame when it was full. Sadler, well, were you frequently strapped? MC, at times we were frequently strapped. Sadler, what was it made out of? WC, of leather. Sadler, were you occasionally very considerably hurt with the strap? WC, sometimes. It hurt us very much, and sometimes it did not lay on us so hard as it did the others. Sadler, were the girls strapped in some sort of way? WC, they did not strap what they were called grown-up women. Sadler, were there any female children strapped? MC, yes, they were strapped in the same way the lesser boys. Sadler, what were the wages at 10 years? And WC, I think it was 4 shillings at a week.
Factory rules from the foundry and engineering workers of 1844 enforced control. Workers could be fined for talking, tardiness, or even minor mistakes, further showcasing the rigid and oppressive environment. According to the Sadler report, some of the main things they struggled with was long hours, which would permanently deteriorate the physical constitution of the children's body, the production of disease, often wholly irredeemable, and partially or entirely exclusive by the reason of fatigue, from the means by obtaining adequate education and acquiring useful habits, or of profiting by those means when afforded. Immorality. Sadler had alleged that textile mills were hotbeds of sexual immorality, and taken evidence supporting this assertion. The commission, however, concluded that beatings. Sadler claimed mills were filled with constant weeping and frequent beatings, especially towards the end of the workday. While the commission confirmed anecdotal evidence of child abuse, it emphasized that such treatments was less widespread than in the past. Witness reported that the strappings were more common earlier times, but had significantly decreased. Mill owners largely prohibited corporal punishment, and some even dismissed employees for violating the rules. A Scottish commissioner noted no evidence of widespread child abuse during their inquiry. Improvement in child treatment were evident, especially in large factories, with most remaining mistreatments occurring in small, obscure mills or by workers directly hiring children. Discuss your question. How did the Industrial Revolution influence the fight for workers' rights, such as fair wages and safe working conditions? Howdy?
The movement for fair wages and safer working conditions came out as workers began advocating for their rights in response to poor treatment and their explanations.
According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, during the labor Industrial Revolution, child labor was prevalent in the United States by 1900s. Approximately 18 of all children by the age of 10 to 15 were employed. These children often worked in hazardous conditions, minimal pay, and textile mill scavengers. They were tasked with crawling under operating machinery to retrieve cotton waste that led to numerous injuries and fatalities. Such dangerous tasks were common, and these were documented events of children suffering injuries, including crushed limbs due to machinery restarted unexpectedly. These perilous working conditions eventually spurred and led to the movements aimed to improving child labor laws and reducing child exploitation.
The fact of the Act of 1833 marked a turning point. The legislation sought to limit child labor and improve working conditions. For instance, it mandated that no child under 9 could work. and restricted hours for older children. However, enforcement was often lax, and often many factories found ways to avoid the rules.
Despite the Factories Act's intentions, the reality for many children remained grim. Inspectors were few and penalties for violations were minimal. Allowing abuses to continue, it would take decades of persistent advocacy and additional reforms before meaningful changes were felt across the industrial workforce.
Workers also began organizing into unions to demand better conditions. Exposure of these groups showed that collective action could challenge the power of factory owners.
Discussion question. What specific event or movement during the Industrial Revolution contributed to modern laws? Most of the laws that were acted were the Factory Act in the UK, which starting in 1833, these laws aimed to improve conditions, in particular for children and women. The formation of the labor unions, movement like this, rise of trade unions in the 19th century, it helped organize for better wages, hours, and working conditions. 1842 Mines Act, UK. This law prohibited women and children under 10 from working in coal mines and addressing dangerous work conditions. The 1884 Pullman Strike, USA. This is a large-scale labor strike, highlighted the poor wages and working conditions influencing the growth of the labor rights activism. The 10-hour movement, UK. Campaigns for limiting workdays to 10 hours contributed to later legislations reducing maximum work hours. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in 1911. Through the post-industrial revolution, this disaster in the US exposed unsafe working conditions and spurred significant labor reforms, including fire safety regulations.
The Industrial Revolution highlighted the responsibilities of society to address inequalities and improve living standards. This era played a crucial role in shaping modern ideas of social injustice.
Business owners were challenged to take responsibility for the well-being of their employees, leading to the establishment of labor laws and regulations. With time, roles of employers and governors were involved significantly.
The writing of reformers like Karl Marx and French Eagles in the Communist Manifesto exposed the flaws of industrial capitalism and called for the unity among workers. Emphasizing the need for systematic change, Marx famously stated, "The history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of the class struggles." This is a sentiment that galvanized workers and reformers alike. Discussion question. How did the responsibilities of employers and the government evolve in response to the challenges faced by workers? Fraylin?
Employers and governments gradually took on a more responsibility for worker welfare and industrialization highlighted through the harsh responsibilities of labor. Employers were initially focused on profits, often disregarding worker safety and rights. Over time, public outcry and worker advocacy pressured government into interfering, leading to the legislation acts like the Factory Act. These laws imposed restrictions on working hours, established a minimum wage requirement, and introduced safety regulations. Governments often began enforcing these more rigorously, while some employers adopted to the better practices to align with social expectations and improving productivity. This evolution marked a shift in an unchecked exploitation to a more balanced approach on labor regulations.
What do you think were the most significant turning points in this evolution?
It would be the climax. It took a lot of blood and suffering to get where we are, but we should be thankful that our people suffered and fought for rights we have currently. We should be grateful and never forget them.
The Industrial Revolution was a time of great change, but also great suffering. It shaped the modern world, bringing about advancements in manufacturing, technology, and society. However, these achievements came at a cost, as workers endured dangerous conditions and exploitations. Over time, through struggle and advocacy, workers gained crucial rights, leading to the establishment of labor laws and reforms that continue to protect workers today.